The 695th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners Podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
Oh, they're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for 2. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding? Into Dixon. Boozer switches onto him. Dixon the kick. Trimble! Got it! And Carolina wins it!
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Sunday night, a second round of the NCAA tournament Sunday night. And unfortunately, we're not here to recap a Carolina win or even discuss a Carolina loss. We're here to talk about the future of the head basketball coach at Carolina because the last 24 to 48 hours would suggest that there's a coaching change on the horizon for the program. So we've got a lot of intel to go over with you guys. We've got some audio from the national media on this issue as well that we're going to play for you, as this is really the biggest story in college basketball outside of the ongoing tournament. Is arguably the best job in the sport going to become open for the second time in 5 years after, Roy Williams retired at the end of 2021. It looks like the Carolina brass is ready to move on from Hubert Davis after a 19-point lead was blown in Thursday's NCAA tournament loss to VCU. Before we get to the updated timeline, let's give you the pod thought of the day, which is how we start every edition of the pod. It goes from Earl Campbell, and that pod thought is, quote, "If it weren't for the dark days, we would not know what it is to walk in the light," end quote. And it's not official. There's going to be a decision. There's going to be an announcement that is coming probably tomorrow. At the latest, we'll get this news officially on Tuesday. And I think it's really important to stress this. If Carolina does, in fact, fire Hubert Davis, this will be a dark day for Carolina basketball. Even if it's the right decision, even if it's something that leads us into a better situation where we're winning at the rate that we want to win at, that we expect to win at. But you're firing one of the most beloved members of the Carolina family. You'd be moving on from, for a lot of Carolina fans, he was their favorite Tar Heel growing up. For me, my first introduction to Hubert Davis was watching him on College Game Day. And then a guy that was, on Roy Williams's staff for almost a decade. You knew after the 2016 loss what Carolina meant to him and what losing that national title meant to him. And when you go back to when he was hired, it felt like all sunshine and rainbows. Carolina had their next guy. The family was going to keep on doing what the family does, which is, produce college basketball coaches that win at a high level. And that just hasn't so far been the case. He's won. He's done some really nice things and some things that as Carolina fans, we never will forget, but there has been more bad than good in terms of the results, in terms of the inconsistent nature that the program has experienced during the last 5 years. And so as we're preparing for some sort of announcement that does appear to be that Carolina will move on from Hubert, I hope we convey the message here that this will not be a move that we will celebrate. This will be a sad day for Carolina basketball. It'll be an emotional time for Carolina basketball, but the hope is that you get the right guy in that's equipped to lead the program in the modern climate that restores us back to winning the way we want to win in both the regular season and the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the best way to put it, is that it's not going to be an exciting day for Carolina. I think there will be some people that will feel excited, but I think for the most part, most people are going to feel like this is, a necessary day, but a hard day, because for the second time now, you are going to have to fire somebody that has a history here at Carolina as a player that deserves to be celebrated. And as a coach, it's not going to necessarily be the same thing. Now, again, it's a little bit different than what it was with Coach Doherty. Coach Doherty did not have anything to really hang his hat on. You point to the win that really sticks out for Coach Doherty that we're going to remember. That doesn't really exist. For Hubert Davis, it does. The run in 2022 has multiple games that will stick out, but the game that will, of course, stick out is the win in the Final Four against the Duke Blue Devils to send Coach K home in what was the most storied edition of the rivalry. There is no doubt that is a moment that we will not forget anytime soon. And so I think that's going to be one of the main things that we're going to stress when ever this day does eventually come and it becomes official. It's that, it is a sad day for Carolina, but it's also a day that brings about some hope for the future. And that's what I think Carolina is ultimately looking to do, is bring some hope for the future, that they can get back to being one of the best programs in the sport year in and year out. Because what we've seen under Hubert Davis is that they've become one of those teams that, very similar to what Kentucky's going through right now, is dealing with a little bit of, I'm not going to say mediocrity. It's been better than that, but it's certainly not living up to the standards that are set for those programs. It's not being in the Sweet 16 every single year. That's basically the goal for Carolina. That should be the goal for Carolina every single year, not bowing out in the first round of the NCAA tournament like they've done back-to-back seasons now for the first time since 1985. When the tournament expanded. I mean, that's not what you're looking for by any stretch of the imagination when you come into a season in Chapel Hill. You're looking for this team to compete for the ACC regular season title. You're looking for this team to compete when they get to Charlotte, wherever the ACC tournament is held. This year it was in Charlotte. And so you are looking for them to be more competitive there, and you're looking for them to handle their business in the NCAA tournament, especially when you get to a game like Carolina had against VCU where they were up by 19. And for the third time in the NCAA tournament, Carolina blows a lead of 15 or more points, and they're 1-2 in those games. They got lucky that they won that game back in 2022 against Baylor, but the other two games didn't go their way. And that other game that you point to, that Kansas game, really was the turning point, it feels like, of the Hubert Davis era. So hopefully, Carolina, remembers him in the right way. Hopefully this will be a guy that at some time you will be able to repair the relationship with Hubert. I don't think it's going to be nearly as contentious as it was with Matt Doherty. But, this is the right move, I think, ultimately for Carolina basketball if they go ahead and move on, and if they go ahead and go outside the family, which it seems like that's the direction that they're heading in at this point.
Yeah, we're in just a real pivotal time, I think, for Carolina basketball. You're about to see a coaching change, that is removing a beloved player and assistant, and it's probably going to lead you in a direction where you're hiring someone who does not have direct ties to Carolina. You've got the arena debate, which means that Carolina could, by the end of the decade, be playing in a new arena that could still be named the Dean E. Smith Center and still have Roy Williams' name on the floor, but not be the arena that so many of us have grown up going to games to over the years. And so that means that Carolina, to a lot of people, could be unrecognizable. But this is just part of it in this climate where these are decisions that have to be made. 45, 50 years ago, this wouldn't be a conversation. Like, you would look at what Hubert Davis has done, and the talk of moving on from him would be laughable. But in 2026, at a program that has the standards that we have, it's not laughable to be sitting here having this discussion. And look, I've really tried to fight the good fight, and defend Hubert and sit here and state this is not something that I want. But since Friday, since we logged off, and this is all I've thought about, I've really got to the point where I do think this is what is ultimately what is best. And I hate feeling that way, because I love what Hubert Davis stands for on the court. I love even more what he represents off of it. But his job isn't to be a role model. His job is to win basketball games. His job is to compete, having this program compete for championships. And as I said, walking out of the ACC title game a few weeks ago, when I watched Duke win the tournament for a second straight year shorthanded, the prevailing thought in my mind was, how far are we away from that? Because that used to be Carolina that was winning the ACC tournament shorthanded. It used to be Carolina that was making deep tournament runs with injured players. And that just doesn't feel attainable right now. And we gotta get back to that. That's just point blank period. Carolina's got to get back to being the premier program in the sport, because that's what, 7 national championships, 21 Final Fours should suggest that's what Carolina be. And that's obviously not where Carolina basketball is at right now. So what we're going to do, we're going to run you through the latest intel reporting. Got to give everyone that's covering this story just, a big round of applause. Inside Carolina, Tar Heel 24/7. The national guys like Matt Norlander, they're plugged in, Brendan Marks, because, for those guys, they're having to cover an NCAA tournament while giving us the latest coaching intel. But, this is now the biggest story on Carolina's campus. And in a lot of ways, like, the Roy Williams retirement was a shock because no one was prepared for that announcement. I think this will send this will trigger an even bigger response, because I don't think anyone thought this was going to be where Carolina would end up after Hubert Davis was hired, let alone after what Hubert Davis did in his first year, taking Carolina to the brink of winning a national championship. So here's the latest per Inside Carolina's reporting on the matter regarding Hubert Davis and his coaching staff. There's a lot of info, so just bear with us as we run through this here really quickly. The team held its previously scheduled end-of-season meeting on 11 a.m. on Saturday. It was pretty much status quo, as you could expect. The standard end-of-season discussion. One-on-one player exit meetings are scheduled to begin this week, ahead of the transfer portal becoming open later on as we make our way through the NCAA tournament. One of the big issues that Hubert Davis is facing, and why there's appears to be a change on the horizon, is this has not been able to raise the kind of money that he needs to have at his disposal to field a competitive roster. We know how much Carolina spent this past offseason. roughly $14 million. The $14 million roster should not buy you a first-round exit in the NCAA tournament, and that's what he was able to produce. Yes, with the absence of Caleb Wilson, but a program like Carolina should be able to overcome losing a player, even someone like his status. The belief is that if Carolina were to move on from Hubert Davis, that the head coach that they will target will be an established head coach with a track record, which means, and this is going to be, I think, one of the biggest talking points, is that Carolina will step out of the family. That this takes Brad Frederick. This takes Sean May. This takes Marcus Page, current assistants on the coaching staff, out of the running. This takes a guy like Wes Miller, who just got fired at Cincinnati, out of the running. And you can look at what King Rice has done at Monmouth and respect the job that he's done. But I don't think Carolina is firing Hubert Davis to hire King Rice from Monmouth, who has yet to make it to the NCAA tournament, almost 2 decades, on the job with that program. Now, the good news is that this divorce does not appear to be a messy one like it was with Matt Doherty. There's a really good chance that Hubert Davis will walk away with his head held high because they're going to allow that. This is probably not going to be an outright firing. The wording around this will probably be more of a resignation, meaning that Hubert Davis was just as equally willing to step down as opposed to forcing the university to outright fire him. And a guy like Hubert Davis, with the way that he has handled himself during his 5 years, has earned that right. When you look at Matt Doherty's tenure and how abrasive it was, he had kind of earned the right to get a messy exit, if you will, from the Carolina basketball program. And it's why he became the black sheep of the family. It's why he kind of hasn't been around for the past 20 plus years. He's said he's forgiven Carolina for what's happened and accepted what Carolina did. But you can still tell there's some saltiness and some bitterness that does exist with Matt Doherty, with all the success that Carolina did enjoy after he was fired. We're sitting here on a Sunday night. There has been no decision that's been made formal. We have, gotten quotes from Bubba Cunningham and from Chancellor E. Roberts that they are evaluating the program as they do at the end of every single year. But they know that they got to give some sort of announcement, some sort of a decision. And that's going to be coming down no later than Tuesday. We had the news earlier this evening that his radio show, which was scheduled to run tomorrow night, so some people think that the season's over, his show is over. It's not the case. He always comes back after the season and does hold a end of season radio show. Well, Jones Angel, the man that hosts that, he did tweet out that show has been postponed, which I do think suggests that this decision will be coming tomorrow. I don't think they're going to delay this any further. I do think this decision will come down sometime tomorrow afternoon. I saw Brian Murphy of WRAL also tweet out that he was hearing that we could hear something tonight. It's 9:30 on a Sunday. Probably looks like we'll get this news at the earliest, probably 10 o'clock or so tomorrow, if not sometime tomorrow afternoon. And mainly because this is not just something that Carolina does kind of on a whim. There's a lot of people that have to be informed because the Carolina basketball family is that expansive. There's so many former players and people connected to the program that this news is going to be discussed about at length to really make sure they are doing the right thing for the program, because that's the most important thing, is doing what's right for the future of Carolina basketball. And if if a decision is reached, there will be a transition team that'll be put in place to handle the day-to-day operations until the new head coach is ultimately hired. And it does look like, for right now, that GM Jim Tanner, who's been on the job for 1 year, will more than likely be retained and be heading up that transition team, along with at least one assistant that would be expected to be retained by the new head coach We can speculate who that assistant would be. I think that would strongly suggest that would be Marcus Page. He's the youngest of the assistants, and he could very well be the guy that Carolina wants to be groomed to be the next head coach, because I do think there will be a desire for the program to get back into a family cycle after their next hire. His tenure does come to an end. So, look, I know you've been staying, locked in, up to date. A lot of reporting coming in. That's just from the local guys. There's also reporting from Matt Norlander, Pete Thamel from the national scene that we'll get to a little bit later on here in the show. But when you dissect, when you read all that intel pouring in from those closest to the program, those with boots on the ground in Chapel Hill, just what do you make of what is ultimately going to be a difficult time for the Carolina basketball family and this athletic department in totality?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as we said, it's very sad that we are at this point, but I think this was something that was coming to a head, I think, for the last handful of years. I mean, the fact that he couldn't get any donors to really buy into him, I mean, this has been a multi-year problem, according to some of the reporting that's been going on around the program. And so, I mean, if you can't raise money in this day and age of the sport, it's going to be really hard for you to be able to stay competitive. And so I think that's one of the main reasons that Carolina is having to move on, is because everything really since the game against VCU, everything has taken a dramatic turn, where before, not saying that Hubert Davis was going to be getting the most funding that he's ever gotten, that certainly was an issue that people have said they've had issues with. Coach Davis is not necessarily the best when it comes to fundraising. We've heard some of that be said over the last handful of years, that he's just not necessarily as involved, I guess, as he should be on that side of things, is what I'm basically taking away from some of the reporting that we've seen. But after the VCU game, it felt like now you were going to be in a really, really tough spot. I mean, it was going to be almost impossible to put together a roster that would be, adequately where Carolina needs it to be able to compete in the 2026-2027 season if he was still the coach. So I think that part of it is that, yes, this is the fan base having a say. This is, a lot of high-end donors having a say, where in the past, you might not have necessarily had as strong of a say in what ends up happening. But when you have the money that is involved in this kind of stuff now, you have to hear these people out, and you have to take their side of the argument, because if they're willing to fund the program through a different coach, then that's probably what makes sense for Carolina more so than sticking with Hubert Davis. One of the things that I think is interesting is that we haven't gotten anything in terms of, them saying people were on the side of then keeping Coach Davis if there was any sort of staff changes. It really feels like after the loss to VCU, most people are putting that loss on Hubert Davis. And so that means that there is no path where you can just change the coaches around you. We were wondering if maybe that was something that you would end up seeing, if there would be, sort of an outlet for Hubert Davis where, it might be, putting off the inevitable, but maybe Carolina would give him another year because of what happened with Caleb Wilson, because of, the fact that he's won 20 games in each of his 5 years that he's been in Chapel Hill. Maybe there would be an off-road for him where it's like, look, as long as you move on from your assistant coaches, not every one of them, but bring in some new ideas, then maybe this would be something that could still work. We have not seen that. We have not seen any reporting on that side of things. It seems like everybody is firmly locked in on Hubert Davis having to go, and ultimately allowing for, Carolina to make a search that, I think some people probably wanted the first time around when Roy Williams ended up retiring. I think there have been a lot of people that have wanted Carolina to look outside the family and try to get the best person available. I think going inside the family and seeing if you had something in Hubert Davis was the right way to go. And, when you look at it, Coach Williams, it hadn't been quite the same amount of time that you saw with John Shire down the road at Duke, but he had locked in on Hubert Davis to be the guy that took over for him. And that was the guy that he ultimately was teaching to be that next guy for Carolina. So it made sense that Carolina named a coach in waiting. A lot of programs like this do. And I think this was the right way to ultimately go about it. I think that first year, kind of proved that was the right way to go about it, but it just didn't end up working out from that point forward. You gave Hubert Davis the opportunity. It didn't necessarily pan out the way that we thought it was going to. And now, I think that Carolina's got to go in a different direction here. And I think the decision, it has to be made by athletic director Bubba Cunningham, who I think is going to still be involved despite the fact that they are transitioning him out. I think he is going to be helping in this search if it does end up going down. I do think that Steve Newmark definitely has to be involved in this as well. And I'm also someone that believes that the Carolina family should be involved to a certain extent. I'm not saying that you have to tell them, you guys get whatever you necessarily want. It's not you guys can go out and hire someone within the Carolina family. It's, hey, we're looking for someone outside of the family. We ultimately think that that's the best direction to go in order to get this program back to where it needs to be. We want your input on some of these candidates that are going to be coming in here, especially from a guy like Roy Williams. What do you think about this guy taking over? What do you think about this guy possibly taking over? So I would hope that that's, the direction that Carolina's moving in. And that's how they're going to go about this coaching change. Jim Tanner also, another guy that should probably be involved in this coaching change. If you are going to keep him on as a general manager, then you would like him to be involved in the process, see who he would work best with, and ultimately be able to form a competitive roster, one that is where it needs to be in terms of Carolina standards. So I think there's a lot of different things that Carolina ultimately has to go through. But I think what we've settled on is that, it's unfortunate. We would love for there to be a candidate inside the family that you could go out and get. But we've run through the guys that have been out there for a while now. They just haven't had the success that we thought that they were going to be able to have at some of their schools. And for that reason, it's not enough to be able to get them in as the next head coach of Carolina basketball. The same can be said for the current assistants. I mean, I know some people, some of the lists that I've seen out there in terms of some of the betting odds have guys like Sean May, Jeff Lebo on there. I mean, look, there are people that have been calling for these guys' heads and for new ideas on the coaching staff in place of them since last year. So to me, it makes absolutely no sense that they would be in the running for the head coaching job. So it's where it's at now is that you have to go out and go find someone outside of the family. And there's going to be plenty of great options for Carolina to look over because of how prestigious this job is. And hopefully, once they make that decision to move on from Hubert Davis, they start contacting some of those guys immediately.
Well, I would certainly hope that the decision to move on from Hubert Davis would not have happened without the blessing of Roy Williams. And I hope whoever the next hire is also is one that has the blessing of Roy Williams, because you're going to bring a non-Carolina guy more than likely into the fold. And look, whoever that coach may be, the hope is that whenever his time is done, he feels like Carolina, and we add him to the fabric. But he's not going to have that direct tie to the university. But this is a university. This is an athletic department that is moving in just completely different ways than what we're used to seeing. And we don't really know how much the old guard really matters anymore. And that's why I've resisted this, because the Carolina family and the influence and the impact is what does make us different from other coaches, other programs. But I do think it's noticeable that the season's been over for 48-ish, 60 plus hours. There hasn't been anything from Roy Williams coming out in defense of Hubert Davis. There was some video of him in the stands where, now granted, he could just be Roy caught up in the moment, but you saw Roy frustrated with what was happening on the court as the team was blowing a 19-point lead. And so I would imagine that all the talks that are going on, all the conversations, Roy Williams has been plugged in, and he should be plugged in. He's the patriarch of the greatest sports family in collegiate sports. He's heading up that family, and so he needs to be involved in whatever does happen next. To I think really make Carolina fans feel at ease with the move that's going to happen, because you're going to bring in someone that is not tied to the university, and who very well knows Carolina's preferred candidate, someone that's going to be on the short list of coaches. He just got bounced from the NCAA tournament, recording here live on a Sunday, and the number 1 seed Florida Gators fall in the second round to the 9 seed Iowa Hawkeyes. Todd Golden is going to be a name that, once the job does come open, we're going to be talking about extensively as a potential candidate to coach Carolina basketballs beginning in 2026 and 2027. What I want to do now is bring some sound from the national media to you guys, and I got it in a timeline. So we're going to go all the way back to Thursday, and we'll run you through all the way to Sunday. I've got sound of Matt Norlander, Scott Van Pelt, Jeff Goodman, who got a real interesting piece of sound that we have to react to, and then Pete Thamel, who joined College Game Day earlier this morning. So let's start here with Matt Norlander. This is on CBS Sports HQ on Thursday after Carolina lost to VCU, talking about the shockwaves that the loss would send around the sport, because they know this could signal the opening in Chapel Hill.
I'm not going to sit here in the immediate aftermath of this game and say that, Hubert Davis is suddenly going to not be the coach of Carolina. I would think that's more likely than not. But knowing that job, we know that area, I think the dramatic nature of this kind of result, it is going to spark a lot of introspection and a lot of questions about, okay, as we move forward here, we just got our best recruit in a long time, potentially our first top 5 draft pick in a generation. What do we do for next year? How do we ensure that something like this doesn't happen again? This is more than just an 11 beating a 6. This is more than just a big upset on the first day of the NCAA tournament in earnest. This is a result here that will have a little bit of shockwaves around college basketball, because it is Hubert Davis, because it is North Carolina, and because it lost to a mid-major team. I'm not going to sit here in the immediate aftermath of this game and say that.
All right, shut up, Matt. All right, so there you go. That's Matt Norlander. Guy I listen to every time. I'm a diehard listener to the Ion College Basketball Podcast. And I think what he said was right. Like, we knew when the game went final, and then as we were, you were in the press conference, I was in the press conference room, the tone coming out of Hubert Davis as we walked back to our cars, we knew where this was headed. And so, I mean, Friday, locally, we weren't even talking about the loss as much as we were talking about just what it meant for the head coach. So Matt Norlander, spot on right there. Now let's get to Scott Van Pelt. He joined the Field of 68 on Friday, and I thought he had a really interesting take about the Carolina job possibly coming open.
Every conversation about him is going to start with the caveat that he's one of the most wonderful guys that anyone knows, because he is. But Carolina can't be in the business of great guys that are not Carolina-level coaches. They just can't. All I'll say is this. If you're doing it, you need to have your hire made before you announce that he's not coming. You need to know that whoever that person is, and you're North Carolina, so you should be able to get somebody. And I don't who you can get is actually always kind of amazing, right? Like big time schools, and you're like, wait, that's who they can get? It's normally a lot worse than you think. But Carolina's got to have a guy, or be able to get a guy. You need to know you've got that guy before you say Hubert's not coming, and then you could say we're going to have a search, but it's bullshit because you've already got your hire, and then a week later you introduce him. You think?
All right, so I don't think he's necessarily wrong about that. Like, does Carolina have to have the hire solidified? The answer is no. But you've got to have, I think, a real strong indication that if you move on from him, you're going to be able to get a top flight college basketball coach, whether it's bringing someone from the college ranks and they're just moving from job to job. We know that Brad Stevens is a name that's going to be discussed. Of course, he's the president of basketball operations for the Boston Celtics. Hasn't coached in college basketball for over a decade, but he's 49 years old. He would be well equipped to come back into coaching and win at a high level. I think the thing that stands out to what Scott Van Pelt said is something that kind of mirrored what Gary Parrish said a few years ago when the heat was really starting to build around Hubert Davis's and his job security. Carolina should have, at worst, one of the top 3 coaches in college basketball, at worst. And have we ever felt like we had that with Hubert Davis? That answer is no. You could argue that even after this year, have we felt like he was a top 3 coach in the ACC with what you saw Ryan Odom do at Virginia, what Pat Kelsey did in 2 years restoring Louisville? Those are just 2 examples, but I feel like there were a lot of times we didn't even feel like we had a guy that was on the same pecking order as John Shire, if you will. Does the hire have to be finalized? That answer is no. But I do think Scott Van Pelt is right. Carolina's going to have a strong indication that when they make the news public that Hubert Davis won't be coming back, that they can get a guy that is equipped to lead the most storied program in college basketball.
Yeah, they got to know that there's strong interest in the position. That's what you need to know going into making the decision. It can't be, hey, man, we're just firing him and we're going to figure out from there whether or not this job has the interest that we think it's going to have. No, you got to know that that interest is out there. So there, are rumors that there have been some camps already reaching out to Carolina and contacting them as to basically ask, is the job available? If those rumors are true, then you know that this job is as attractive as we think it is, because there are some big names that are supposedly reaching out. So, I mean, yeah, at that rate, I think that's when you can go ahead and make that move. And I think Carolina's done some of that research probably already. I wouldn't be shocked if they did it even before the VCU game in terms of searching out how entertaining how much interest there would be in the market if this job was to come open. Some of the names that stick out, I think that most people are looking at. Todd Golden is definitely one of the top guys there. There's no doubt about that. I know there are a lot of people. I've seen some people that have commented, not on this stream, but to some of the tweets that we put up over the last couple of days. Well, why would Todd Golden want to leave Florida for Carolina? Well, because it's Florida for Carolina. Florida isn't even the most important. Florida basketball is not even the most important, athletic group on campus. No matter how successful they are, they're coming off a national championship, and pretty much all that their fan base cares about is, are they going to be back in football? That's what they're looking at, especially now after the success that Miami has had in football. So there's going to be a renewed interest in Florida football by that athletic department to try to get it back to where they want it to be. I'm not saying that hurts Florida basketball that much, but you would imagine that he is certainly a guy that would look at Carolina, look at the influx that Carolina is going to be putting into the basketball program. And I think, this right here should prove that Carolina should be putting most of its money towards basketball. Like, at this point, you've tried with football. It's a failure. Don't worry about football. You need to worry more about the program that is going to carry your brand, which is basketball. And so hopefully that's the way that they look at it. And if they do, then yeah, you probably could interest a guy like Todd Golden. TJ Otzelberger from Iowa State, another name that I think you would imagine would be very interested if Carolina was to reach out to him. And I don't think that's one of the names that's on the list of those that have already reached out to Carolina behind the scenes, according to some of those reports. But certainly a guy that I think you would be interested in. Those are 2 of the top coaches in the country. There are plenty of other guys. I mean, you look at the list of the current odds according to some of these betting sites in Vegas, some of these books in Vegas. I mean, you're talking about the best coaches in the country that Carolina could be going after. And you're talking about, yes, a guy in Brad Stevens, who's in the front office for the Boston Celtics, has done an amazing job of putting together championship rosters, and that they believe Carolina's job could be so attractive that it would be impossible for him to turn down. That tells you where this job still is at in college basketball, even in the NIL era, where it seems like there are some basketball programs that are worth a little bit more than they once were, a la Texas Tech, certain other programs that they have the money just in general in their athletic department. Carolina is at the top of the list. It is one of the top 3 jobs in the entire country. And so for that reason, I think you are going to see Carolina go out and be able to attract a lot of these different guys. But yeah, I think Scott Van Pelt, circling back to that, is 100% right. You need to know that there is interest in your job before you make the move on Hubert Davis. But I think we've gotten to that point already where it seems like there is enough interest that it's time to make the move if you're going to make the move.
Yeah, look, I'll always say this. In the basketball community, this job carries more weight, more prestige than coaching at the NBA. Now, people might laugh at that. Everyone in the basketball world knows who coaches North Carolina because of what the brand represents and how big and powerful and expansive that brand is. Most people could not tell you who coaches the Orlando Magic, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Sacramento Kings. So yeah, this job coming open, it's the best job in college basketball, bar none. I think it's one of the top 3 jobs in college athletics. I'd put it right up there with the prestige that Notre Dame football, Ohio State football, Alabama football, what those schools, what those brands offer in football. That's what Carolina is in basketball. And so, yes, you're going to have established head coaches at power conference levels that have either won national titles, have either gone to Final Fours, or on the brink of doing both, that would jump in a heartbeat if the job came open. Mm-hmm. That's just the way that it is. And so you're right. Carolina's probably going to do what they should have done 5 years ago. But 5 years ago, I think we were, for the most part, really comfortable with the way that Carolina handled the search. You passed it along to a longtime assistant, and you chose that over Wes Miller, a guy that was at the time an up-and-coming young head coach who had done big-time things at UNC Greensboro. This time around, you've got to do things a little bit different, and mainly because Wes Miller failed at Cincinnati. Like, if Wes Miller would have gone to Cincinnati and made 5 straight tournaments, had won tournament games, had the Bearcats competing in the Big 12, I don't think this would be the search we're about to go on. I think Carolina would just bring Wes Miller home because we knew how much he wanted the job 5 years ago. When you go back and look at his face at Hubert's presser, which he showed up to support Hubert, you could see how hurt he was that he was not the guy leading Carolina basketball. But these things they work themselves out. Hubert has not done enough to more than likely retain his job. Wes Miller's already been fired from Cincinnati, and now Carolina is on the verge of making a changing of the guard type hire for its basketball program in 2026. Now let's get to the Jeff Goodman audio, because there's a lot to unpack here. It's about 2 minutes long, but what he says is going to stick out, and it's going to be something that, if this is proven to be true, we're really going to have some questions that will have to be asked about how exactly this hire went down 5 years ago.
I'm with it. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people realize is Hubert didn't really want this head coaching job. Like, this was something that was brought to him. Roy Williams picked him, and you can't say no. You can't say no. So Hubert took this job as a beloved former player, as a beloved former ESPN employee, and as a beloved assistant coach at North Carolina. And nobody's ever uttered a bad word about him. And now he's getting crushed. year after year after year. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's all on board with it as well. You know, give him his buyout. It's about almost $500,000 million, and move on.
Which is nothing for Carolina.
Yeah. Right. And I think here's the thing, guys, is it's former players, it's boosters, it's everybody understanding that Hubert Davis hasn't done the standard at Carolina, right? The standard is to be competing for national titles. The standard is competing for Final Fours. The standard isn't just to limp in to the NCAA tournament, which they've done multiple times when he's been there. Even the year in which they made the run, his first year, before they beat Mike Krzyzewski in his final home game at Duke, they were like a 10 seed at that point. We weren't sure they were a lock to get in. Then they didn't get in a couple years ago. They barely got in last year to the first four. This year, obviously, and this was the key factor, right? How they ended the year and then blowing the 19-point lead to VCU, how they blew it, the post game, all of it. So I think at this point they're trying to figure out the exit strategy for Carolina, and I think it's also like, hey, we want to do all our due diligence and make sure we can get somebody really good before we actually make a move on Hubert Davis. So I think that's what today.
All right, so there you go. It was about 2 minutes there, but look, whether you like Jeff Goodman, whether you love Jeff Goodman, the guy's plugged in. The guy knows his ish. It was always explained to me in the way that I interpreted Hubert Davis getting the job was that Roy Williams wanted to retire after 2019, after Carolina lost in the Sweet 16 to Auburn. He had called Hubert Davis over and was going to retire. And between Hubert, his current assistants, family, so on and so forth, he talked him into staying because at that point we thought Carolina was closing in on at least another Final Four run, at least another shot at a national championship. Of course, the next 2 years will unfold the way that they did. And then, Roy retires in 21, kind of out of the blue. But if we would have really went back and read in between the tea leaves during that final year when he was coaching the program during COVID, you could tell that the writing was on the wall. Hubert Davis said that when he got into coaching to have a chance to be the head coach at this job. Like, the thing for Hubert is he's not going to go coach somewhere else. Like, he'll probably just maybe get back into TV, maybe start a podcast. I don't know. He'll have enough money to do whatever he wants to do for the rest of his life. But he took the job because he wanted to be the head coach here. When you hear Jeff Goodman say that Hubert Davis didn't want the job, he took it because it was presented to him. What do you make of that? Because I just find it hard to believe that Carolina would be that negligent to give him the job if he truly didn't want it. Like, I feel like when the job was presented to Hubert Davis said yes, and that's Carolina just went with it. I can't imagine that they offered him the job and said, well, I don't really want it, but according to Jeff Goodman, and I've seen some people commented on the stream, on Facebook, on Twitter, that have kind of alluded that's kind of the way it was made out to them, that he was basically forced into taking the job after Roy Williams retired kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, I don't know what to think. Goodman is locked in. I am far from his biggest fan. I mean, I will say that. But he is a dude that is locked in. So if there's going to be somebody nationally that's going to know, it would be a guy like Jeff Goodman. Now, do I believe him 100%? I don't. I do think that there was part of Hubert Davis that wanted this job. Maybe now looking back on it, maybe that's what Hubert is saying, is that, hey, there was a part of me that didn't really want it when it was first presented to me. And, maybe this was just, ultimately his way of trying to explain why things have gone as bad as they have. I don't know. Maybe that's the way that they've gone about it, that he's chosen to go about it, is basically to say, I never really wanted the job in the first place. But, I feel like that would have been communicated at some point through some of these sources that would have said there was some hesitancy, but eventually Hubert Davis took this job. I find it hard to believe that no one in Chapel Hill would have known about this, because we have not heard any reporting from Inside Carolina on this. We have not heard any reporting from Tar Heel 24/7 on this. And who knows, maybe when we circle back around and maybe when they end up announcing that he is officially fired, maybe there will be something like that in there that says that he never really wanted to take the job in the first place. It was basically forced upon him. I never got that feeling, though. I feel like Hubert Davis, because he had become the lead assistant under Roy Williams, kind of knew that that was where things were heading. And so you could say maybe they should have given the job to Wes Miller. I don't think Carolina's in a better spot if they give the job to Wes Miller. I really don't. I think Wes Miller has proven to you that he is not a power conference head coach. And that was really the only other guy that they were strongly considering for the job at that time. So I think they went with the right decision at that time. And as we said, after that first year, it really felt like we were in a really good spot. And you thought, here we go. We've got our guy for the next 20, 30 years, however long Hubert Davis officially wants to do this. We of course, we rushed to that assumption, and now we found out that that's wrong. But I don't believe I can't get where Jeff Goodman is at, in that I think he didn't want the job. Now, again, as I said, we'll see whether or not that officially comes out. Hubert may eventually address that. I wouldn't doubt it, especially if that starts to pick up more steam from other people around the national media, and especially if it picks up steam from the Carolina media. But I feel like this was a job that Hubert wanted to take on. It just hasn't necessarily gone the way that he expected it to go, or that anyone expected it to go. And that's why we're sitting here talking about Carolina having to make a move that we did not think they would have to make this soon after the hire of Hubert Davis.
The other interesting thing that I took away from that comment was that, in Jeff Goodman's opinion, this could be just as much Hubert Davis coming to the table offering a step down as much as it is Carolina and their people going to Hubert and saying, hey, this isn't going to work. We've got to go in a different direction. But if that's the case, then why wasn't this move made last year? Because I feel like if Hubert felt like that, wouldn't you have known before a 12-1 start? Wouldn't you have known before being 17-4, before Caleb Wilson injures his wrist, and that really changed the tune of the remainder of the season? Carolina just, once they lost him for the remainder of the season, that was kind of the final nail in the coffin for what this year could have been. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I feel like when someone is bought in, when someone is committed. If this is just as much a Hubert Davis thing as much as it is a Carolina thing, then you probably should have been able to feel like this and examine this well before the point the season got to this. And so that just leads me to wonder, why did you not make the move last offseason, knowing he was going to be entering a make or break year? We knew this was always a possible end result. Getting to the point where we're having to conduct a coaching search was always on the table entering this year. And so if what Jeff Goodman is relaying there is remotely close to being true, then we could be a year behind, because you probably should have sensed this last year that he probably no longer felt like he was right guy to lead Carolina, was no longer committed to lead Carolina. And there should have been a move that was made last year when Carolina, started preseason top 10 and had to back their way into the NCAA tournament before getting knocked out in the round of 64 against Ole Miss.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder if this year, to me, I wonder if there was still confidence maybe in himself that he could go out, especially with a GM, and maybe put together a roster. Maybe that was really ultimately what it was that Hubert thinks or thought to himself before this season, hey, as long as I have a GM here, as long as we are, going with the structure that we should have been going all along with, maybe I can put together a roster that is competitive enough for me to be able to win at the level that I'm supposed to. Maybe that was the thing that was ultimately missing from this program. I think that was probably some of the thinking from Hubert. I mean, it was the thinking for us when it came to Hubert, was that, what he did, outside of year one was not good enough. And look, Byron Goodman says, what about year one gave you the confidence in him in order to think that he was potentially the guy? I mean, look, he came off a slow regular season, but you also beat Coach K in the final regular season home game in front of all of his former players. I think we all at that time, when the end of the regular season came, we thought to ourselves, even though they got an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, they would go through the ACC tournament, show some fight there, but ultimately fall short. I think what we thought was that this is a new coach. This is a young coach that is learning on the fly. And then when he got into March, we said, okay, this is going to be a guy that knows how to coach during this month and that he's going to be able to show that. Nobody thought during that time that was a fluke run. Nobody thought, oh, he got lucky and this is just him paying off what happened. They thought, no, this is a guy that could be the next guy at Carolina. At least that's how I felt. I can't speak for everybody, but I know there were a lot of Carolina fans that were feeling the exact same way on that night where Carolina beat Duke in the Final Four. They thought, we've got the guy here because he just took down arguably the coach's greatest, the sport's greatest coach. And so, I think that's from that point forward, things never really went the way that they were supposed to. But I think what we thought was that maybe it was just lacking that GM, and maybe having that GM would change everything for Carolina. And I think to a certain extent, you saw Carolina get better this year. But then when it gets to the most important time of the year, the same things that have been the thorn in the side of Hubert Davis and this coaching staff really show up once again. And I talked about it the other day when we were going through the reasons why Carolina would ultimately move on from him. It's the lack of player development, man. Guys did not get better as the season went along. Carolina was not playing its best basketball in the month of March. We thought that they were going to be playing their best basketball in the month of March. The confidence level, it does not seem like that is there for this group whenever they reach this most important time of the year. It seems like the most confident groups that we had. I mean, when you went into the NCAA tournament under Roy Williams, you were confident that you were making a deep run. Those teams had a bravado about them. These teams have never had a bravado about them. It just hasn't happened. You even go back to that team that won the ACC regular season title and, went into the NCAA tournament as one of the favorites. They took care of business against Wagner, but remember, they were struggling in that game against Michigan State, and then they end up losing to a team in Alabama that, I get it, man. They ended up making a run, but that still is inexcusable when you have a team that was as good on paper as Carolina was that season. And again, there was no confidence in certain guys on the roster. I think that, led to some moments that ultimately were the downfall of that team. And so I think that's where it's at. And I wonder, with this year, when you started to see things go wrong, and it started out on the West Coast trip for Carolina, even when they had Caleb Wilson, where things started to go wrong there. Carolina then gets it back on track, but then, down the stretch of the season to lose your final 3 games, you wonder if Hubert has gotten into the sort of mindset that maybe this just isn't for me. Maybe this year proved this just isn't for me. So I don't know if that was there last year. I really do think that Hubert maybe thought to himself, even if he was doubting himself a little bit, he thought as long as we get a GM in here, maybe that will change the tide and maybe we'll be running things the way that we should be running things. But ultimately, it didn't work out. And now, I wonder if he's gotten to the point where he said, where he's saying to himself, I don't have the confidence in myself. The university doesn't have the confidence in me. And that's why it's probably the best thing for me to do is to step aside and resign as opposed to being fired.
All right, let's get the last piece of audio in here before we start winding down this edition Pete Thamel was on College Game Day this morning. He was on College Game Day yesterday with the report, was back on there today with the latest around Hubert Davis's job security.
Pete, what is the latest from North Carolina in the coaching situation with Hubert Davis?
Well, Reese, the Hubert Davis watch continues, as we reported yesterday here. His return as North Carolina's coach remains unlikely. The timing and the mechanics of that expected departure are still being hashed out. Right after this show on ESPN, North Carolina's women's team hosts an NCAA sub-regional there. Once that event is cleared through with UNC's administrators, expects more focus to be on Davis's situation. Look, Reese, as we said yesterday, there's not an expectation that UNC is going to fire Hubert Davis. I've been told that some type of orchestrated resignation has been discussed and is a potential outcome here for Hubert Davis and UNC. Davis did meet with the Tar Heel team yesterday. He did not tip his hand or give any clarity on the future. So for now, the Hubert Davis watch continues. We'll see if clarity comes in the upcoming days.
All right, so there we go. And I think that's where we are now. Is just wanting clarity on what exactly is going to happen. It feels like we know what that resolution is going to be. Because, as of Friday, I'll be honest with you, as of Friday, I was very much in the camp of I don't want him fired, but changes have to be made, whether it's we're bringing in new coaches, whether even we're bringing in a GM who is more of a scout as opposed to an agent. I was very much in that side. And then, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to watch the tournament the next 2 days, but how can I drive up some content for the website? Well, let me write 2 articles. Let me make the case for, let me make the case against, and the case for keeping Hubert and the case against keeping Hubert. And if you read either article, there was one distinct difference. The case against keeping him was a lot longer than the case for keeping him. And it just, I think as the game became final on Thursday, we kind of processed the season coming to an end on Friday. And then just taking in all the reporting on Saturday and then today. This I think is, like, to me, this just feels inevitable. Like, I don't think we're going to get a statement tomorrow from Bubba Cunningham that Hubert Davis is back. I don't think you're getting a statement from Hubert Davis about being back. I don't think he's ever going to host another radio show. I think Carolina is going to announce that they are moving in a different direction, and then they're going to start, conducting a very, very important search. To try to find the right guy to lead this program, to restore this program. So that's where I think we're at. I mean, I don't think there's not any other way that I think Carolina moves forward. I think this thing, after blowing a 19-point lead, has just reached the point of no return. Kind of like, what happened with Mac Brown after the James Madison loss, followed by what happened in the locker room where he supposedly quit and was back at work the next morning at 6 a.m. Like, you knew after that moment, Mac Brown's time was probably done leading Carolina football. And I think that sucks. I think we would have liked to at least maybe get one more tournament win. You go out in the round of 32, but maybe we can talk about this and we get out of here. Like, I think if Carolina wins Thursday, I don't think this is a discussion. I think if Carolina would have beaten VCU, even if they had to win the game in overtime, let's say VCU still, mounts the comeback, forces overtime, but Carolina wins and they lose to Illinois on Saturday, I don't think we're having this conversation. I could be wrong. I think the conversation would be kind of like, okay, you probably maximized your roster without Caleb Wilson in the NCAA tournament, but you're going to enter next year needing a big year, which is probably why 5-10 years from now, when we're doing this podcast and we're still doing what we're doing, we'll look back on that loss on Thursday and be thankful for it. If this works, if Carolina makes, and I think Carolina's making the right decision. I do think it's what's best for Hubert. And I think it's what's best for Carolina basketball. And I think it's what's best for the fans that we have watching and listening to us right here right now. Now, you've got to get the hire right. Because if not, like, you fire someone like Hubert and you don't get the hire right, then the criticism is going to be tenfold the next time we potentially have to do this. But I really do wonder if they win the game on Thursday, just how different this could be. But I think if we could look into the future, 5-10 years from now, we'll be able to look back and say, as tough as it was to be in the building, and that was tough to experience, that was really tough to watching this team blow that lead and melt down in front of our eyes. I do think that this is the best thing for all parties involved, and hopefully, later this week, Carolina identifies the right man to lead this program and restore this program back to its winning ways.
Yeah, I mean, look, they still got a little bit of time that they can, take to make the decision. I think, as we said, you got to know that you have vested interest in this job. You got to know that there are guys that you can go out and get, and maybe this process is going to be relatively quick. You've got 17 days because on April 7th, that's when the transfer portal opens. You got to have your guy by then. You got to make sure that your guy is locked in because you've got to be talking to these guys that are in the transfer portal. You've got to be working on putting together a roster that's going to be good enough to compete at the highest level, because that's what you're making this move for. You're not making this move to be right back where you were this year, next year. It doesn't matter who you're hiring. You're making that move to be one of the best teams in college basketball. And so if you're going to go ahead and make that move, well, then you better make it in a timely enough manner where you can make a run at legitimate prospects in the transfer portal, because we've talked about it. There have been some areas where Carolina, hasn't necessarily been able to pick up guys at the positions that they've really needed them. You go back to this past year, point guard was one of those positions that Carolina really needed in the transfer portal. They end up with Kyan Evans. You're hoping this year that you can end up with one of the big name guys like a Donovan Dent, somebody like that under whoever is going to be this next coach. But I think you're right. I think when we look back on that game, that's probably going to be the best thing that could have happened. But at the same time, it's incredibly sad because that was the final moment of Hubert Davis. And you would have liked for things to have been a little bit better than that. You would have liked for Carolina to, maybe have found a way to win that game. And maybe even then you still end up making the decision after the Illinois game because they just get beat down and you say things still aren't going the way that we expect them to go here in Chapel Hill. But it's a sad ending. It's a sad way to go out, losing a 19-point lead against a mid-major team. But, I think when I was leaving the arena the other night, I was thinking that to myself. I'm like, man, this hurts. This is a bad spot to be in for Carolina. But at the same time, I think this is ultimately what had to happen because I knew in my mind that this was going to push a lot of people over the edge. And some of these people that were on the fence, and there were a lot of them, including myself, but a lot of people that were on the fence were going to be pushed over the edge and say, this is the time that we need to make a move. And so, I think with some of the names that are being floated around, I believe that Carolina is going to go out and get a big name. They're going to get someone that we look at as one of the best coaches in the sport or one of the best up-and-coming coaches in the sport. And I think that Carolina is going to be able to return to being a national power. And so I think, we'll have our moment where we'll pay tribute to what, Hubert Davis was able to do here, what he did in that first season that was so special, and talk about that. But ultimately, I think now we're getting into that mindset that Carolina is getting a new coach. It's going to be hopefully an elite guy. And this is the most important hire that Steve Newmark will make. This is the most important hire that Bubba Cunningham has definitely made during his time there. And this will be a very important moment for Tar Heel basketball moving forward because it will prove whether or not Tar Heel basketball is going to get back to where it used to be, under Roy Williams, under Dean Smith, or if it's going to be what Kentucky is right now, which is a program that, it still has its moments where it looks great, but has other moments where, it looks relatively like one of the other teams throughout the country, just another team. And that's ultimately not what you're looking for out of Carolina basketball.
We've got some it's not breaking news, but we have one thing we need to address before we do get out, because now this has the potential to get ugly, because we have our first public member of the Carolina family calling for Hubert Davis to retain his position. This is Larry Brown, of course, played for Dean Smith, was an assistant under Dean Smith, legendary career, both college and the NBA. This is a tweet coming from Seth Davis, but he has released an official statement stating, quote, I understand why North Carolina fans were disappointed with our loss to VCU, but people should remember that when Caleb Wilson was healthy, this team beat Ohio State, Kansas, Duke, and Virginia, and Kentucky on the road. If Caleb did not get injured, this team might be in the Sweet 16. I believe Hubert Davis is the type of person and coach who should continue to lead our program. We have a great recruiting class on the way, and many of the current players want to stay to play for Hubert. I call on the North Carolina administration to do the right thing and allow Hubert to continue serving as coach, end quote. That's a pretty big name within the Carolina basketball family. And I'll say this, maybe should have released that statement on Friday. Maybe should have released that statement yesterday, not Sunday night at 10:15 as we're winding down the second round of the NCAA tournament. What do you make of that? Because as we're sitting here tonight, we haven't seen any other former Carolina basketball player since this became the biggest talking point in the sport come to the defense of Hubert Davis and his job security. And that's according Joel Berry. That's including Justin Jackson, two members of the media who, of course, played for Hubert when Hubert Davis was an assistant. We referenced what Tyler Hansborough said after they lost, where he was not surprised. That's a pretty indictment on how he feels about the state of the program, where he's the most accomplished player in the history of Carolina basketball. I noted that Roy Williams hasn't released a statement, wasn't interviewed, and I think if Roy Williams wanted his opinion heard, he would find a way to get it out there. What do you make about that? Because now, if there are more members in the Carolina family that feel the same way, that start to voice their opinion, this has a chance to get ugly, and I think that's not what we wanted. We wanted this to kind of be a smooth exit, a nice planned transition without the Carolina family getting hurt. But, if what Larry Brown is saying, this could be Matt Doherty 2.0, where there's a split and a divide among the Carolina basketball community.
I mean, it's one guy. It's one guy. And, frankly, when it comes to Larry Brown, I mean, dude, you're just going to have to learn to get over it. We're doing what's best for the university. And I think at this point, we can come to the conclusion that this is not working. You could say that they were great under Caleb Wilson. This team was still going to be a 5 seed. That's not good enough. Not here. Not in my mind. So you think that's enough? Because I don't. I expect more from this basketball program. So, yeah, I get it, man. Losing Caleb Wilson was a huge part of the issue. Talks about, retaining guys on the roster. Most of these guys aren't Carolina caliber players, if we're being honest. So why would you want to keep them on this roster? If you can go out and get one of the greatest coaches in the country to come in and take this job, then you're going to get guys that should be playing for Carolina, that are going to be on the, in the standard of what Carolina is used to. And those guys that you recruited in this recruiting class, well, first of all, if you're going out and hiring a proven guy, they've got their own guys that are going to be following them in this recruiting class if those guys don't want to stay around. You hire one of the best coaches in the country, those guys are still going to want to be here anyways. You're going to be able to keep those guys because, yeah, there are going to be other schools that are going to be after them, but it doesn't matter. You're still you're bringing in one of the greatest coaches that we have in the current landscape of college basketball. They're going to be able to convince those guys to either stay or they're going to convince them that, hey, you're not good enough to play over the guys that we have in our recruiting class. So I don't really look, I'm not worried about what Larry Brown thinks. That is one guy's opinion. I think, look, he's entitled to his opinion, but there are a lot of other people that are thinking differently. And there are guys that played for Hubert Davis. And yes, there was somebody that was commenting below Zach Gelb's post, and I was tagged in it on, when Joel Berry was speaking with him and said that Joel Berry never played for Hubert Davis. So why do we care what his opinion is? First of all, Joel Berry did play for Hubert Davis because Hubert was an assistant at the time when he was on campus. And for them to be at that point where they are not sticking up for Hubert Davis, even if they're not calling for him to be fired, those guys aren't going to call for him to be fired. They have too much respect for him. But the fact that they're at the point where they say they don't know the direction that the program should go in should tell you everything that you need to know. The only other guy that I've seen stick up for Hubert Davis and say that he should keep his job was Kennedy Meeks. That was the only other guy that I've seen. And so you've got two guys that have been really vocal about it. You've got a bunch of other guys who have been telling you that it seems like it's time for a change. I mean, they didn't directly come out and say it. Again, you did not have Tyler Hansbrough come out and say, we need a change. But he said, this is what Carolina basketball has been. And by him saying that in a roundabout way, he's saying this is not the standard that we're used to at Carolina. So I don't think you have to worry about it getting ugly. But at this point, even if you do have to worry about it getting ugly, you got to do what's best for this program in the long term, which is ultimately what everybody's wanting, because you saw the people on social media. You saw every player on social media saying, I cannot believe this team is falling short yet again. That was the reaction that we got from the players. Winning cures everything. And so that's ultimately what you have to do here at Carolina. So I'm not necessarily worried about Larry Brown and his opinion on this potentially swaying Carolina to either keep Hubert Davis or this becoming something ugly. I don't know how many other guys are on his side.
Will be interesting, though, to see if many former players, coaches, assistants, whatever, do make their feelings known about this. Now, like I said, it feels a little bit too late. I think, to me, the timing of this would suggest that he knows what decision is going to be made public tomorrow, and just wants to be out there that he was in the Hubert Davis camp. But we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I'm not going to say I disvalue what Larry Brown says. The guy played for our program. The guy, served under Dean Smith's, his coaching staffs. You also weren't trusted enough to be given the program in 2000 when Roy Williams said no. And you're a reason why Matt Doherty happened. So you got to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, you were because of your off the court issues. We weren't willing to give you our program 26 years ago, and you let one of the worst 3-year periods in the history of the program happen. So you got to kind of have some self-awareness when you're wanting to come to the defense of a coach that, for the lack of better terms, has more underachieved than he has achieved. And that's why we're having the discussion that we're having tonight. And we'll be here with you throughout the remainder of all this, both here on the podcast as well as the website, HeelToughBlog.com, where a lot of content is up on the website about this. As I mentioned, there's an article that I made the case to keep Hubert Davis. I made the argument for why you should fire Hubert Davis. And then I had the news that broke tonight about his radio show being postponed tomorrow. So all that coverage can and will be found HeelToughBlog.com. And the second that we get any formal announcement, there will be an article up on the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com, as this is the number one storyline we'll be tracking on the website this week. And once the decision does come final, we'll be getting you ready for the coaching search with our preferred candidates, so on and so forth. We also have the start of spring practice for Carolina football that gets underway beginning this week as well. Anthony will have you covered. So, guys, we encourage you, get to the website every single day, HeelToughBlog.com. The latest and best coverage of both Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football. Ask for the pod. You guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, just search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any audio editions of the show throughout the remainder of what's going to be a busy and important Carolina basketball off season. If you're a video consumer, if you're new to the stream tonight, the best way to keep up with us, like and follow the Facebook page at Heel Tough Blog. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow us both on Twitter at HTB_Josh for me, at HTB Anthony for him. The stream is posted to both of our accounts. The second we go live, you'll be notified, and then you can jump in and be a part of the conversation. I do want to thank the many of you that have commented on the stream tonight, whether you're doing so on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Quite simply, too many comments for us to scroll through and address, but we see you, we appreciate you, and do know that what's being said is being received and it's being appreciated. You are why we do what we do, and we appreciate all the support tonight on a difficult but necessary edition of the podcast, talking Carolina basketball and its future. But with that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.